Moving on, imagine a workplace where diversity is not just seen but celebrated, where every voice is heard and every individual feels valued. Sounds ideal, doesn't it? But making this a reality requires more than just good intentions. In our upcoming panel on bridging the diversity inclusion gap for optimal performance and advancement opportunities for all, we're fortunate to have leaders who've turned the ideals of diversity and inclusion into everyday practice. Let's welcome our moderator, Georgia Forbes, managing partner and founder of Directed Revolutions Consultant, and our esteemed panelists. Let's welcome them up.
Moving down. Yeah, not taking the middle. Okay.
Oh, wow, that light is.
Good afternoon, everyone. As noted, my name is Georgia Forbes. I am the founding and managing partner of Directed Revolutions Coaching and Consulting. We provide strategic planning, digital integration, as well as cybersecurity management for optimal performance. I am also the founder and executive director of Ionic 6, which is a STEM nonprofit that provides computer science resources for underserved students throughout New York City. I am very excited to be your moderator today to speak on this topic. As we know, it's very relevant and timely given our environment and culture, where we do see lots of regulatory changes happening. And I think this just further shows that we have not yet reached our ideal of equity and parity, just making it a little more important that we do find the right solutions for moving us forward. And I am excited to be here with my esteemed colleagues today as we dive into this very meaningful topic, and I'll give them each a moment to introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eva Medilek. I am a certified high-performance coach, also a certified DEI communicator. And basically what I do is I help leaders and teams actually level up their performance by incorporating inclusive practices into their businesses. I believe that we cannot achieve social change without personal development, and we also cannot perform at a high level without creating safe, inclusive environments and investing in our diversity leadership as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm Julia Rock. I'm the CEO and head career coach at Rock Career Development, where we enable organizations to transform their cultures to create spaces where employees can fully thrive. We also help professionals and athletes to transition their careers into something fulfilling and lucrative. And for me, this topic is really, really important because we're in a space now where DEI conversations are being silenced. And in dealing with career transitions, we're finding that people are not just transitioning industries or jobs, they're transitioning out of spaces that feel unsafe, they don't feel like they belong anywhere, and everyone loses in that situation. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I am Gitima Sharma. I'm a professor at California State University, Fresno, nurturing the next generation of counselors and therapists, and a well-renowned scholar in the area of sense of purpose and meaning, and invited by universities like Stanford University as top 8 scholars in the area of sense of purpose and meaning in life. But when I focus on what is my purpose and what gives me maximum meaning and fulfillment, that is to really support individuals and organizations to close the gap between their future aspirations and hopes and their current realities. However, despite a lot of achievement in my career and a lot of publications, and now as a purpose-driven coach consultant, I have realized that when we deal with issues that diminish our own self-worth or mental health or well-being, then we don't have those spaces at our work environments to be able to take care of our own mental health and well-being while not compromising on our career path or not continuing to achieve boundless professional fulfillment that many of us are seeking. So the perspective that I bring to our panel is how to foster mental health, personal well-being, and professional fulfillment among individuals from diverse backgrounds and diverse workspaces so that no one feels that they have to compromise in one area of life for success and well-being in another. Thank you.
Nice. Hello, I am Dr. Marian Zanuck. I have a PhD in clinical pathology and some other degrees that have led me along the way, and I have patented and developed some orthopedic products that are getting some nice attention. I'm hailing from the East Coast, from Connecticut, and I have noticed in the last few years a very positive influx in the gender equity that is being recognized within the entrepreneurial world. It was harsh 7-8 years ago when I first entered, harsh a lot longer ago, but what a difference I'm sensing in the last few years for a lot of reasons. And there's a lot of strategies that really benefit to take advantage of that. So I've been quite encouraged lately, at least in the entrepreneurial world, business startup, regarding gender equity and the ability for our daughters' daughters to become the leaders.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Casanova Green, and I am the Director of First Year Experience, Diversity and Inclusion at Hocking College in Nelsonville, Ohio, which is a 2-year technical and vocational focused community college. I also serve as the lead pastor of True Vision Christian Community in Lancaster, Ohio, and the Vice Presiding Bishop of the Cathartismos Collective housed in Columbus, Ohio. And I think what I can add to this conversation is lived experience. I have been placed in a role in my professional life to where my focus is preparing students for academic success. So I have to have that understanding that academic success is a holistic approach. Meaning, if there is no peace in your personal life, if you do not feel safe in the spaces that you're in, if you don't feel represented, if you don't feel heard, you will not be able to achieve in the academic space. And even in the work beyond Hocking and in the faith-based work and other things that I do, I'm really looking at the concept of equipping. How can I prepare you to be your best? And a part of that is understanding the fullness that someone has to bring to the table.
Thank you, everyone. Now, this is a great meaty topic, and we're not going to be able to cover all of it today, but we do hope that the pieces that we do touch on provide some meaningful insight for everyone. And just to kick our conversation off, we'll start a little bit with unconscious bias, right? It's present all around us. It's definitely a factor that impacts diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what are some of the ways we can identify them early on, as well as approaches to mitigating their effects within each of the environment? Eva, would you like to get us started?
Yeah, sure. I want to start by just sharing a story. Now, imagine this. We're at my dining room table, and it's my husband, his friend from Germany, and myself. We just finished having dinner, and I was being complimented on being a good cook, because I am. And, we're just sitting around chatting, finishing our wine, and my husband's friend from Germany turns and looks at him and says, "Eva's great. She's not black. She's one of us." Now, that was meant as a compliment. And I know with all the awareness around diversity and inclusion and microaggressions and unconscious bias, I just heard some of you cringe at that. Some of you may have felt uncomfortable. Maybe some of you got angry. And maybe there are some of you who have a hard time believing that someone actually said that to me as a compliment. Well, my point in sharing that with you is that we all have said and will say things with the best of intention in our hearts, but that can hurt others. And so I just want to encourage you to be kind, generous, open with your mistakes and the mistakes of others, because we are all learning and growing in this process, and naming, shaming, blaming, or guilting people is not going to move us forward in this work. And so with that being said, when we talk about mitigating unconscious bias, what I like to refer to is Harvard professor Chris Argyris, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right. He did work on a framework, a conceptual framework that's called the ladder of inference. And so basically, with the ladder of inference, it starts with the base of the ladder, and you just imagine the steps going up in a ladder, if you will. And at the base of the ladder is the observable facts and data. And as we climb up the ladder, you know, the concept is that we start to add meanings and assumptions and conclusions based on our beliefs, and then we take action on our unconscious biases and assumptions and meanings and stories. And so what do we do now that we've moved away from the facts and we're up the ladder with our conclusions and our actions that are based on our stereotypes, our unconscious biases, our assumptions? Well, we've got to find a way to get back down the ladder. And so the first thing you need to do, if you've been guilty, if you will, of an unconscious bias, is to just pause. I have this PLA formula, right? Just pause. Look at the story that you've created. See where you might have integrated some preconceived notion or unconscious bias into that story. And as you realize that, you want to just start lowering yourself back down to the base of the ladder. What are the observable facts and data? What did that person actually say or do? And then be conscious of the story you made up about it. And then you want to go to asking questions. You want to get curious before getting furious with yourself or others. And so ask questions so that will help you understand another person's perspective, understand what they mean before you go up the ladder with your biases, stereotypes, and assumptions. So, you know, what do we need to move forward? What did you actually mean by that? Tell me more about what you said. And I think that is one of the first steps for us to start to mitigate unconscious bias, is to first be aware of what's going on inside of us as we hear something, say something, or react to something that might have an underlying bias to it.
So for me, I always tell people that my favorite students are the underdogs, because they are not, how we put it is, they don't believe in respectability politics, where if I follow the formula and do what the people want me to do, I'm going to get the result. And the biggest thing about being in this DEI space and mentoring people in this DEI space, it means that you're going to have to get uncomfortable. And the biggest discomfort is going to be confronting those biases that inform how you see that person in front of you. What you might see as a liability could be somebody else's asset. And as leaders, it is our job to pull the beauty, pull the potential and the talent out of them so that way they're able to grow and to thrive. Because here's something I've learned in life, that the most perfect person might not be the most effective. I'm gonna say, can I say it again? I'm gonna say it again. The most perfect person.
You want an amen?
Is amen. The most perfect person might not be the most effective. So as we're looking at people in, especially as our world is diversifying, as our workforce is diversifying, we have to begin to look at the people who have the potential to achieve what needs to be done, the potential to grow into this role, being their authentic selves, and be willing to be discomforted by their experience. Because mentorship is not just about you giving, it's also about you learning. Because as you give and as you learn, you make yourself better for the next person. And it's going to cause you to have some conversations with yourself that you don't want to have. It's going to cause you to feel some ways about yourself that you don't want to feel. And I think in the narrative of our nation right now is that people don't want to be uncomfortable. You got to be uncomfortable. Yeah. Like, it is imperative that you become uncomfortable. So that way you can grow and be able to develop people to where they need to be.
Thank you so much for that insight. Gitima, is there anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, one of my research focuses on how to expand students, educators' capacity as citizens of the world who can advance a positive change, not only in their own life and immediate communities, but in world at large. So based on Dr. Daisaku Ikeda's framework on global citizenship, I focused on 3 tenets, which is how to promote students and educators, wisdom to perceive the interconnectedness between all forms of life. Because if we really perceive the interconnectedness between all forms of life, then we would understand, right, that harming one form of life would cause direct harm to us. Then second is how to foster people's capacity to have compassion and even imaginative empathy for those who might not be living near us. And then third is to really how to foster courage to engage in dialogues with others who are different from us. And this research showed that even if people's capacity or wisdom to understand interconnectedness has increased and their compassion has deepened, given how aware we are about different sufferings happening in different corners of our world, the ability to engage in dialogue with those who are different from us is diminishing. And in the world of social media, it's so easy to unfollow, unfriend, not connect, but spaces where we can establish authentic relationships and engage in heart-to-heart humanistic dialogues is diminishing. So for me, it comes down to, can I continue to polish my own heart and my own mind and use education, coaching, counseling, everything that I do to be able to create that space where we can engage in most humanistic dialogues so that we can connect based on our common humanity and shared humanity with a greater vision rather than continuing to contribute to the division that's happening. Thank you.
And along those lines of just speaking to our individual humanity, I think one of the greatest spaces where DEI becomes most relevant is typically within the workspace, where individuals are navigating and understanding the environment they're in, and how do I define success within this workspace, and how do I move forward. Where it becomes challenging is after you've learned what those stated rules of success are, that they do not seem to be applied universally for everyone. But it's done in different ways for different people, whether the distinction is based on abilities, or if it's based on gender, if it's based on race. There are lots of distinctions and differences that are there. So how do we enable and empower individuals to still be successful within spaces that may not have a strong DEI interface, and there are still lots of biases that may be rampant within the workplace? Personally, as I've worked just about 20 years within corporate America and had to learn to navigate that workspace myself, there are definitely challenges. Now, while there may be lots of organizations who will say they fully support that, the challenge is oftentimes they don't know how to truly do it, and it becomes the responsibility of the individuals who are suffering from the bias, which is inappropriate. Right? If I am the victim, I cannot also be the one for the solution, particularly when I haven't really been given the latitude and the power to actually affect change within that environment. Now, unfortunately, I want to say change, especially of that magnitude, because this is about culture and environment. Those types of changes are changes that have to come from the top, from the leadership, right? These are not bottom-up changes. However, The other factor is organizations, again, may say so, but it really has to be greater than a check-the-box exercise. The only time these initiatives become effective is when you can get to a place where you no longer need initiatives, when they are now a part of your environment and it's the way that you do business. So, and when that is very clearly stated and your workforce truly can say, here is my path to success, and everyone can follow that path and see the same results, then we've gotten there. In the absence of that, it is important for building relationships. It's important not to be deterred by some of those setbacks, right? Because ultimately, those sorts of challenges are intended to filter you out of the environment. And while it may be very challenging for navigating through that space and that ladder, find friends. Because you will not be the only one that's facing those challenges. And it's often very helpful to just have a comrade in arms who you can even just talk to. And it helps you to continue to move forward. So certainly learn the rules, apply them, and continue to move forward and, tackle each challenge as they move forward until we can get a place where it truly is part of the fiber of the organization and part of the fiber of what they do. And I think we'll see that when it actually becomes part of the fiber of this country. Gittima?
Yeah. When I think about career journey, I just have to share, my own story. I was, I think 14 when my mother had tried to commit suicide, and I was about, 21 when my father had. And I could see that there were a lot of socio-cultural expectations that were heavy on them. And during that time, the access to mental health care was really low or unspoken of, which I think there's still so much stigma attached to it. But it was, and of course, they became healthier, in both in their mental health and physical health. But my mother's physical health suffered a lot due to her mental health. And she was just 46 when she passed away after a battle with cancer. But it's then that I really reflected on, for what purpose do I want to use my life? Because I understood that life is so limited and I just can't continue to hold myself back based on what I feel I just have to respond to because those are socio-cultural expectations. And that's when I decided I want to use my life to reduce depression and anxiety in society. And I want to use my life to empower specifically women to live a life, a career of their vision, undefeated by feelings of stress, overwhelm, burnout, but most importantly, filled with courage to close the gap between their future aspirations and current reality. However, once I pursued my master's and then PhD in counseling and established myself as a researcher, published more than 30 articles, got many awards, including Outstanding Leader, Outstanding Professor, Outstanding Scholar. When I dealt with my own phase of depression after 4 miscarriages, I felt there was no space for me to even engage in those dialogues, even within a department that focuses on counseling and mental health, because there's so much stigma attached with it. That's when I decided to use my research and education to make, life coaching, counseling, mental health services accessible in community. And because there is such fear around if we talk about our mental health and personal well-being, or how we are struggling with low self-worth or low self-esteem, then how would we be judged in our professional arena? But I think just us coming together from so many diverse backgrounds and openly sharing our stories and connecting in these spaces across our career realms is so beautiful and so needed. So thank you for this space. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Gittima. And that's very revealing that even while you're working in a space that's supportive of mental health, it still wasn't open enough for you to be able to find the support you needed within that realm. And I think that just shows, that we need diversity on all levels. Lots of times we do focus on the biggest challenges, which are typically either gender or race, but diversity comes across the board in all different facets, and looking at individuals that may have something that's different or do something that's different, and are we open to really being able to embrace and to understand how to work with individuals who may have something that falls against what we've known as standard, essentially. So thank you for sharing. We're going to move on a little bit into strategies, right? What kind of strategies or actionable strategies can we apply for helping to move forward? And I grew up in New York, and so I grew up in a space that was very diverse. I was always surrounded by people of different cultures, different background, and certainly grew up in the age of believing in a colorblind America. And when I entered the workforce, I experienced my first racially discriminatory action in the workplace when I was in my early 20s. At this age, it being the first time, it was absolutely devastating to me. And being young and full of principles and standards, I walked out. I left the job because I said, this is not the type of workplace I should be in. Now that I'm older and hopefully wiser, that may have been an opportunity to affect change. But at the time, I didn't know that, right? I was completely distraught and offended by what I experienced because I didn't think I ever would experience that. And so I walked out and I found somewhere else. But, I'd like to hear there are probably better ways I could have handled that at that time. And so I'm going to turn over to Julia and just ask if she can share some strategies that we may be able to apply in moving forward.
Sure, and so I'd like to look at it, especially from a leadership and organizational standpoint, just thinking about some of the clients that I've worked with. When it comes to actually being able to move forward, there are several steps that need to happen in order for the change from the top down, like we talked about, for that to happen. And the first one is really around tying that commitment to moving forward, tying that to your mission, and tying that to value. It's easy to say, well, we're committed to making changes. I mean, think back to 2020 when George Floyd passed away at the hands of a police officer, and everyone was saying, hey, we're going to make these changes. But over time, we've seen things, kind of dissipate in society. But for organizations and leaders, if they're willing to say, hey, this is now part of our mission, this is now how we execute our business, and then you also tie that to the value that the organization can create, because we know that research shows that diverse and inclusive organizations, they have higher revenues, better productivity, better innovation. Once you're able to tie that commitment to the value that your organization is creating, then it's easier for that commitment to stick. The second thing I wanted to mention from a leadership perspective and organizational culture is around measurement and accountability. A lot of times we say we have this commitment, we're going to move forward, but how are we holding people accountable for this? How are we measuring that we're actually making progress and we're seeing change? And so having a commitment to saying, hey, we're actually going to create an accountability structure so that if we see that people are not being promoted, they're not being, they're not having the right opportunities, we're seeing high turnover, we're seeing people experiencing a lack of belonging, who's being held accountable and how are we measuring that progress to make sure that we're achieving those goals. And then the last thing I'll say to make sure that we give more airtime for folks on the panel is around creating the right mentorship programs, going back to what Casanova was mentioning earlier. When it comes to employees who are coming from diverse backgrounds, they may be feeling lost in this big organization or even small organization, not knowing how to navigate. So creating mentorship programs with people who are willing to listen, willing to advocate, willing to provide the right sense of advice for these individuals to be successful, that is the only way that we can really start to level the playing field and begin to move forward.
Thank you. Marion.
Yes, I'd love to speak to the dynamics and challenges of inclusion, which I feel need to come from the external society and from the individual as well. And I've been proving, knowledge and confidence are cumulative. And we have to start from a point of strength from the individuals that we want to propel and advance into the world. STEM training, science, technology, especially for young women, but at a young age, critical. And speaking about the discomfort that we have to step into, we have to have the courage to do that. We have to hold steady. One thing I do, it's a very fast mental game. If I'm in an awkward situation and I need a fast pull of courage to do something gutsy, I imagine, perspective check. I'm a warrior on a battlefield with a sword and I'm chopping heads. I'm usually dressed in an excellent medieval fur outfit and leather. I'm looking awesome. But I am defending from invasion. And now that is hard. That's a tough job. That is a hard life. Here I sit in my white leather chair in my office with the digital world around me, and I feel obligated to immediately do what I need to do because I have no reason not to. And that advancement is an inner strength that comes from within. Did you know that only 8% of patents are owned by women? I'm working hard to change that metric. Did you know that only 92% of funding goes to women? Poo on them. We don't need them. Like, leave them like tumbleweeds in the Nevada desert. I don't need them. Instead, find the other way to do it. Strive to get the job done and forget about those barriers that are stopping us and work around them. But educate and create the strong beings to be able to advance that way with success.
Marion, just want to take a moment, if we can, I don't think the audience heard you correctly, but get clarity on one of the metrics that you shared. I know you said 6% of women own patents, and how many, what was the percentage of women that get funding?
8% of patents are owned by women only, and then for funding from investors, the men get 92%.
Okay, there we go.
It's the way it is. It's the boys' club, and they know who they know, and they like to give the money to them, and that's it. But in the beginning, I did mention the encouragement of the change that I have felt in that improvement and the new support that we are getting because we are showing what women can do.
Hey, Georgia, do you mind if I chime in one more time? So sorry to disrupt here, but just thinking about that analogy and that picture that Marion was painting. My mom gave me a saying when I was younger, and it's something that I've taken with me. It's not what they call me, it's what I answer to. And so when we think about these environments where we may not be getting the right support and we may feel like we're just kind of moving back and forth and no one's there for us, we have to put ourselves back in the driver's seat to say that we belong here. This is our opportunity to stand up for ourselves, and this is an opportunity for us to shine. And so having that mindset of that you are the CEO of your career, that you are the architect, that no matter what people are saying about you, even if the infrastructure is not there yet, you have an opportunity to still make a name for yourself. And to Georgia's point, making relationships, finding the right mentors, that you're taking the right steps forward until we no longer need these programs.
I'd like to add to that.
Sure.
You know, when we talk about creating inclusive communities and overcoming unconscious bias, you know, it requires us to approach things in an inclusive manner, and most of us have not been taught how to do that. We have to see these opportunities of overcoming biases and mitigating them and the gender disparities as an opportunity to build bridges rather than tear them down. And what that looks like in practice, when you talked about strategies, like how you would do it differently now than you would in your 20s, you know, as a woman of color, I often get called articulate or intelligent as a compliment. You know, and I even remember one time when I was in the hospital early in a pregnancy with my first child, and I overheard the doctors talking about me behind those thin curtains that are supposed to keep your conversations private, right? And they said, you know, we have a 26-year-old intelligent black female. And I was like, okay, that's over 37 years ago, and I still remember being called intelligent. Like, what would be the option? An ignorant black female? Would they have said that about a white woman? And so here's how I would do it today, because you had an incident in your 20s, I had something in my 20s as well. I would really take someone aside and say, look, I know you meant that as a compliment.
But it's not.
But when you make that statement, to or about a person of color, there's an assumption that comes with that. May I share that with you? Because you want to get permission to have these opportunities to help people learn what was wrong instead of going straight into shaming, blaming, guilting, and you're a racist. Because you're not we need all hands on deck here. That's right. A rising tide raises all boats. And you are not going to get buy-in when you cause other people shame, blame, or guilt. Now, of course, there are situations where they need to be. But we're living in an age of moral outrage and cancel culture, and I think when we approach things in an inclusive manner to give people the opportunity to learn what they said and why they said or did it was wrong, we have a better chance to get buy-in for change.
Sir. Casanova?
I'm going to jump in real quick. You notice how I've not said a word.
That's okay. We like you.
I love y'all too. Y'all my new sisters. But I really want you to pay attention to the fact that I have not said a word. I said my piece and I just sat back and kept time. Because this is an example of what you do. I'm a man. Granted, I am a black man in America. That's a whole thing in itself. But we were talking about this earlier. I'm like, it would make sense for me to just sit back and let my sister speak than to do what men do, just jump in. Because if you look at the intersection and kind of like the y-axis of race and gender here in America, you have white men that's seen as like the head. That's the patriarchy. I guess they run the world. I don't know. And then you have white women who they up there with the white men, but they're a woman. So then you got black men. Oh, you a man, but you black. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
And then you have black women who do not. They're like, oh, prime example. You see how they treat vice president. What does she do? You didn't ask that about Pence. You didn't ask that about Joe Biden. You haven't asked that by anybody else. So I said, let me lead by example. Let's let the women speak. Let's give them the stage and the moment and empowerment. I just sit back here in my purple suit and I support. Because that's what you do. And as a mentor, like my mentor's a black woman. So, she gives me the space to lead and to do. But when we're in a meeting, I actually have done this. I have to check somebody because they tried to come for her. I'm like, first of all, she can fire you. Second of all, we ain't having this today. This is what, as mentors, if I'm mentoring a woman, I advise in the shadows and I let her handle business. And I defend her. And I stand for her using my maleness and my access to be able to move her forward into what she needs to do.
That's right.
That's allyship.
True allyship.
That's allyship.
So we have shared a lot today. We do hope you've enjoyed the perspectives of the panelists. We do have a few minutes remaining, and we'd like to open it up for maybe 1 or 2 questions.
Questions, y'all, not manifestos?
Not manifestos. Oh, I hope it's slower.
So, thank you so much for being here. And as I'm sitting in the audience and I'm watching you walk up, my first thought is, oh, there is a person who is white, who is on this panel talking about these issues. This is so great. And with all due respect, what you're talking about is gender.
Yeah.
And you were talking in the beginning about how the people who are the victims cannot be the ones who are carrying the flag of the change. And so I too work in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And many, many times, even I have talked about this, many times I have been excluded from conversations because I look the way that I do. And well, this isn't your fight, this isn't your thing. And my perspective, and I'm interested in your perspective, my perspective is if people who look like me aren't willing to be in the fight and be leading, be willing to lead the fight to get other people who look like me with us in this. This is going to be just another thing that happened at some point. And so I'm curious about your perspective. I'm curious, I'm looking around this room and yeah, there's folk here, but it's not as packed as it was this morning. And we're in a world now where DEI is being stigmatized, especially the D part and maybe the E part. So I'm curious about your perspectives on that. Thanks.
Can I jump in on this really quick?
Go for it.
See, Dr. Bettina Love talks about the concept of being a co-conspirator. And she told the story, it actually just really happened. This was during, I believe, Charlottesville. And that was when the first time when people were tearing down the Confederate monuments and removing the Confederate flag. This black woman began to climb a flagpole to rip down the flag. And there were black folk, white folk who were alongside her, supporting her. And the police, and somebody heard the police say, well, if we tase the pole, that will get her down. And the pole was surrounded by one of those metal picket, spiked fences. So one of the white men who was in the group with her heard this. And what he did was he walked up to that pole and he touched the pole. And you know what the police did? Nothing. They let her rip that pole down, and she climbed down. They both got arrested. But had he not put his hand on that pole, that girl would have died. The question I ask people, especially in those who are white, full transparency, I'm married to a white woman. What are you willing to lose? An ally, here's the thing about allyship. I love allyship, it's a great concept. An ally is able to step out of the fight at any time. A co-conspirator is willing to give up everything possible to ensure that the person who does not have the access or the opportunity they have gets what they need to get. And the biggest issue within people, with having white people within this DEI discussion, which it is needed, and for us who are of color have seen people that when it gets tough, George Floyd, the riots, when it gets tough, I want no parts. If you in it, we need you in it. What are you willing to give up?
And I'll want to add to that as well. I think from experience as a person of color, the trauma that's in white-bodied individuals coming in and taking over and telling us what we should and shouldn't do and what we should say and what we shouldn't say is probably, still a sore subject for a lot of people. I, on the other hand, got into this work because I saw what was happening with white-bodied individuals who wanted to step up and defend Black lives and Black Lives Matter, but were being canceled for saying things like all lives matter and I don't see color, instead of educated or at least pointed in the right direction of research, of resources to educate themselves. Because it's not the responsibility of minoritized folks and underrepresented people to educate you on your privilege and biases. And there's a lot of people in this work that come in it with full privilege and biases and that are not willing to listen and learn and ask questions on how they can best serve. So I think you might be sort of feeling the effects of some past history. I've had it with people myself, here's what you should do and here's what you say. And I even held a forum called the Allyship Awareness Forum where I invited all white-bodied individuals to listen to 6 women of color on a panel and listen to us. We had a lot to say after George Floyd's murder. You weren't allowed to interject in what you think and what you thought because there's been a foot on our necks for hundreds and hundreds of years, and that unleashed a lot of voices. So it's not that we don't need you, it's an all hands on deck. But please understand some of the trauma most people in this space who are people of color have endured, so that it's kind of a trigger. It's a trigger trauma. But as persistent as you are, and I know you're amazing at it, she's married to a man of color. I'm married to a white man, you married to a white woman. We got it going on, and we see both sides, okay?
Thank you so much. We'll take the next question.
There's amazing recognition of all the changes going on in the world today. And I think some of it is self-inflicted, self-fulfilling prophecies. I grew up in India. I worked in Africa and multiple countries. I've been in the United States. I'm brown. I've never suffered any discrimination anywhere, particularly in the United States, where in my early years, more than 20 years ago, I've been here for 35. I was president of the PTSA of the best high school in the United States, elected by a largely Caucasian population. The president of the United States, a black man, was elected, and he was re-elected with better numbers. So I think the United States is the world leader in giving opportunities. With that kind of perspective, I have a question for our learned panelist, where there was a slight error that, 8% of women have the patents and 92% of money goes to them, which was corrected as it goes to the men, which means the women still get 8%. But if they only have 8% of patents, it's quite okay, they only got 8% of the money. And what the question is, what can we do to encourage more women to get more than 8% of the patents? Now, I do have one woman in my life, a young woman who's joined University of Virginia, and she got the Jefferson Scholarship, which essentially says, hey, you get a bright idea, you tell the president of University of Virginia, sir, I'd like to meet you. He says, yes, ma'am, when are you free? That is the way we recognize opportunity. We pass opportunities and recognize performance. So what can we do to raise the performance of all women? And there are plenty of men also who don't achieve much. What can we do to raise their performance in strengthening our education system? Thank you.
Marion, would you like to start?
Yes, certainly. Quickly, in my mind, there's a couple of elements that really portray strength in childhood. Reach them young. Be brave to push your children through. Power tools and sports or some sort of a challenge when they are younger. It might be public speaking. It might be tennis. Whatever the focus is, the choice. Power tools. Men and women, young children, give them the power tools. Not only does it give them a whole new world of ability and learned structure to build later on in life to solve problems and fix things, but it's also an empowerment transformation. When I was 3.5, 4, I learned that. The youngest kids, my engineering dad, and down in his tool space, once my older sisters went to school, I snuck down to that basement and I had the power tools going. My mom would, to her benefit, allow me to. She trusted me. She knew that I was capable. Another thing I've experienced, simple as this, but chainsaw. A chainsaw to chop wood, if you have the exposure of something of that equivalent. It's an empowering act that is simple to do. It's not a big involvement, but it's strength. To go out in the world like a warrior, to tackle all of the challenges that are out there, to be brave enough to grasp the education that is needed, to hold steady, to grab into the engineering types of programs that may not be populated as much by women, or the biomedicine, anything. But I find that if you reach these young beings early and you push them early, they will have the resilience for leadership, and they will have the courage of strength to push beyond boundaries and know that they have the ability to manage any situation that arises.
Can I?
Oh, please go ahead.
In response to that question, I was also thinking that it's really not about performance or ability, because I think the dialogue is really about that women have so much ability and so much potential to advance a positive change, not only in their life, but families, communities, world. So there is no question about performance, ability, human potential, strength, courage, intelligence. But the question is about social capital, which is who knows whom, plays a very critical role in who gets access to what resources, including the low percentage of patents. So I love how our panel focused on importance of mentorship and importance of speaking out, and not just speaking out for our own well-being and our own fulfillment, but to foster friendships across diversity so that we can speak out for each other, with friendship as our base, but really not to question the potential and performance, but to really think about what systemic barriers do I need to remove to increase the access, because social capital plays such an important role. Thank you.
So we have our final question.
Hi, my name is Sherry James, and I will be speaking on the panel that's running late, so I want all of you guys to stay because you're amazing. 'Cause we were saying that, like you should stay. But I want to say thank you so much to the time that you've spent being vulnerable, opening up, and having this tough conversation. But I have a question. One of the things that I think is most missed when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion is those that suffer with disabilities. And I noticed that there was no one on the panel, and that's so much more of the population than we think. So what can we best do to make sure that we are inclusive of people who maybe are veterans, people that struggle with PTSD? Even if they're not a veteran, if we survive 2020, we all have a little bit from a PTSD perspective. So can you guys just really quickly, I feel like you're ready.
Oh, girl, I'm ready.
I see it. Okay, go for it. Go for it. Thank you.
Actually, there is representation of disability. I have been diagnosed with depression, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, PTSD, and attention hyperactive ADHD, all them levels. So for we have to get out of the mindset that disability is just a wheelchair.
Yeah, not everybody in a wheelchair.
A lot of it is invisible.
A lot of it is invisible. We were talking about something earlier. I'm like, my neurodivergent senses were tingling in that moment. Especially, it throws my students off when we have this discussion, and I share with them, this is what's going on. They're like, we never knew. Okay, well, but because disability or differing ability, however we're calling it right now, means that that person has to navigate the world differently. And I think it bodes the discussion of thinking more intersectionally, looking at all the layers that a person brings to the table, rather than what we do as a culture is you're this, you're this, you're this. Like all these layers. Like how can we address all these layers to make sure that we are being treated with equity, meeting the need, rather than treating people equally and asking the fish to climb a tree.
Yeah. And just something to add to that, just again, looking at the different layers, part of the challenge that we find in organizations is they're not taking time to actually listen to their employees and get to know them. Because if you took the time to sit down with your people, and not just these surveys where you get the stuff on a bar chart that's faceless and you don't know who's, and then you're aggregating all the data so you don't even really know who's saying what. It's really about, are you getting to know what people are experiencing? Because I'm a black woman, but I've dealt with depression as well. But again, if they're just looking at things on the aggregate, it's like they put me in this one box, not this other box over here. So it's, are you taking the time to get to know your employees? What structures do you have in place? Are there safe spaces created for people to be able to voice what they're dealing with? But versus just, okay, you're a black person, you're a white person, you're a this. What are the safe spaces where I can bring my full self and what I'm dealing with and actually be vulnerable so that I can get the support that I need?
Thank you, everyone. Very well said. And thank you so much. Thank you to our audience for listening to us and for those wonderful questions. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
He wants to get a quick service real quick.
Stay sitting.